Welcome all, and I will introduce Kirk Gradine. He's been a theosophist for a long time. He's done a lot of really fabulous presentations for the Institute of World Culture, and he's given a lot of really good talks at the Lodge. And he was very happy when I asked him to do this subject on Krishna Avatar. And Kirk, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jonathan. So and greetings to everyone. It's wonderful to see a nice collection of folks tuning in today. And I just wanted to start. Can everyone see the image of Nandini Iyer there?
I can.
Okay. So many of you may have known Nandini. Some of you may not, but she passed away very recently. She was a brilliant teacher and professor of philosophy of comparative religion and Sanskrit, initially at Oxford and then in Santa Barbara, both at UCSB and the City College here. And it's particularly relevant that I'm wanting to dedicate this talk to her today because I was one of those very fortunate students who took some of her courses in the early 80s at UCSB, and in particular, a course called Religious Systems of India, in which we were presented with, a very clear, magnificent, and well-articulated overview of Vedic and Upanishadic traditions, the Gita, Shankaracharya, and other key figures and ideas, central ideas from the Hindu tradition. And Nandini, as probably many of you know, was also a tireless and natural leader and teacher of the Santa Barbara ULT for over 40 years, and also one of the co-founders of the Institute of World Culture in Santa Barbara. So I'm going to start with this quote from the Bhagavad Gita. I am the source of all. From me, everything emanates. Thinking thus, the wise worship me, absorbed in ecstatic contemplation. I am the self, Atman, O Gudakesha, abiding in the hearts of all beings. So Krishna, as the 8th incarnation of Vishnu, is very likely the most celebrated, worshipped, supreme personality, quote, the unborn and the beginningless, the supreme Lord of all worlds of current day Hinduism. Known by many names across the different regions of India, the celebration of his birth has long been accompanied by fasting, singing, chanting, the recitation of sacred texts, as well as musical and dance performances. And while cities such as Mathura in Uttar Pradesh, believed to be the birthplace of Krishna, emphasize the childhood and the Rasalila aspects, the divine playfulness and love, the intoxicating flute and cosmic dance of Krishna. Other regions, such as that of Odisha, hold huge festivals in honor of more metaphysical conceptions. Great processions, such as those of Rath Yatra, centered on the Jagannath temple at Puri, celebrate the pan-Hindu abstract conceptions of Krishna Vishnu, representing Purushottama, the Supreme Spirit, or Parabrahm, the attributeless absolute itself. According to Pew surveys done in 2013, at the time, there were roughly 1 billion Hindus worldwide, and 68% of them, or 641 million, were Vaishnavites who regard Vishnu as the supreme deity. At the time, that was more than twice the number of the entire US population. However, it should also be noted that in many Shaivite traditions, both Vishnu and his incarnations are regarded as aspects of Shiva, and that therefore the teaching of Krishna is also revered and studied. For example, Shankaracharya, who is, as we know, the foremost expounder of non-ritualistic, non-dual Vedanta philosophy, and who is often associated with Shaivism, wrote one of his most famous commentaries on the Gita. In addition, beginning in 1785, with the first known translation of the Bhagavad Gita into French and English by Charles Wilkins, the core teaching of the historical Krishna Avatar has had a profound spiritual, moral, and intellectual influence in the West through multiple avenues. Many of these are non-sectarian and non-religious in the conventional sense. First, the Gita and other traditional texts of Hinduism, such as the Manu Shastras, are known to have brought about the European Oriental Renaissance of the late 1700s. And when these same texts reached Boston harbors in the 1830s, they helped inspire the Transcendentalists movement in the US, most obviously through their influence upon the writings of Henry David Thoreau. Then in 1890, William Quan Judge's recension, along with his insightful introduction and footnotes, appeared just 2 years after the publication of The Secret Doctrine. And as we know, both H.P. Blavatsky and Judge pointed to the Song of God, the Bhagavad Gita, as a core jewel, not only of Hindu philosophy, but as a kind of golden textbook, rich with mantramic guidance for all seekers on the path of true wisdom in the service of humanity. The path of bhakti, the book of devotion, as Judge called it, was also that of karma yoga and jnana yoga, of the right performance of action and the deepest forms of spiritual knowledge. The Gita was called the study of adepts, the keynote teaching of Brahmavak or Theosophia, given to the entire fifth race, the whole of humanity at the dawn of Kali Yuga, the most spiritually dark of the four ages, by one of the most legendary and enigmatic of enlightened teachers some 5,000 years prior. Far from being a relic of pre-Christian or pre-scientific and therefore primitive civilization, the Gita is extolled in theosophical writings as a spiritual classic of the Sanatana Dharma, eternal word or religion, a dialogue between the human soul and its divine parent, every verse of which, with the right keys, can be found rich with profound yet practical spiritual guidance, as well as multi-layered esoteric meaning. In addition, the sacred and mysterious principle of avataric descent, the quote, word made flesh, unquote, the logos in human form that Krishna represented, began to be understood not as an anthropomorphic tribal myth or personal god, but as a universal, ever active reality, a fact in nature. Represented in many traditions under different names and symbols, connected with the mystery schools of antiquity now being reestablished in the West, the avatar was explained by H.P. Blavatsky as a kind of pinnacle of a vast hierarchy and continuous lineage of bodhisattvas, mahatmas, nirmanakayas, and adepts. These are not fanciful idealizations, but living beings, enlightened exemplars, wise teachers, initiators, and guides who had, since the dawn of time, watched over, incarnated into, protected, and aided all sentient life in our world system. Driven by universal compassion and the highest wisdom, whether called Krishna or Christos, Orpheus, Osiris, or Buddha, Blavatsky taught that all such incarnations are derived from the same bija or seed known as Mahavishnu or Adi Buddha, also called the Great Sacrifice and the ever-living human banyan. It forms what she called the root base of that tree, from which all the great historically known sages and hierophants have branched off. Such beings and their emissaries, she also explained, are those who stand behind the modern theosophical movement, resounding the same underlying keynote. At the dawn of the Aquarian Age, the great brotherhood of bodhisattvas seek again to aid the wheel of human evolution by reviving this sacred secret doctrine for all aspiring souls who, like Arjuna, have made themselves ready. The stories of Krishna life, sorry, that was jumping ahead. The stories of Krishna's life are found originally in the Bhagavata Purana and the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata, as many know, is the longest epic poem known to human history. The longest version consists of over 100,000 shlokas, said to be roughly 10 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, and about 4 times the length of the Ramayana. And it is because these epics, like much of ancient Indian sacred literature, were passed down orally for centuries, the actual dates of their original composition are unknown. H.P. Blavatsky calls the Mahabharata the, quote, prologue to the fifth race humanity, all in explication of the Avatar, but which, she says, must be explained by the secret sense contained in the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita. For example, as told in the Mahabharata, Krishna was the 8th child of Devaki and Vasudeva, the previous 7 sons having been killed by Kamsa, the demon king, who Krishna later slays. At the cosmic level, wrote HPB, the first 7 children refer to the 7, quote, the 7 centers of energy evolved or rendered objective by the action of Fohat upon the one element. It's volume 2, page 604. And as the 8th child, Krishna refers to that boundless circle in which the 7 arise. She also states that in terms of the path, the first 7 children are the 7 principles of human nature, from which, quote, we have to part or separate before we reach the Krishna or Christ state and center ourselves entirely in the highest, the 7th or the one. So we begin to see that the scope of our theme today goes far beyond what we could hope to convey in any number of presentations. But for purposes of our talk today, we'll look at a few passages from the Bhagavad Gita in relation to 2 fundamental questions. Who or what is Krishna? And number 2, what does realization of Krishna, or how does realization of Krishna arise? In answer to the first question, we should acknowledge that we're inquiring into one of the deepest mysteries and metaphysics of divine science, what HPB called the grandest mystery of every old religious system. Bhavani Shankar, said to be an accepted chela of the 1875 cycle, also stated, quote, the Avatara is one of the most abstruse truths of Hinduism, as it is of Brahmavidya. To have even a faint idea of the great truth, it is necessary to know what real spirituality is, to have some notion of the spiritual ideal of adeptship, of Jivan Mukti. It is truly said that even in this proud age of intellect, very few can form a correct conception of a Jivan Mukta. The Gita itself suggests how formidable the task is. Quote, I know all beings, past and present, O Arjuna, and yet to come, but no one knows me. Among thousands of men, scarcely one strives for perfection. And among those so striving and even succeeding, scarcely one knows me as I truly am. And when Arjuna is given not simply a verbal explanation, but a temporary awakening of true spiritual clairvoyance, of direct cognition in the 11th chapter called the Vishvarupa, the vision of the divine form of Krishna, he quickly acknowledges that he is not yet ready not capable of accommodating the glory, the magnificence, the universality of the reality. At the same time, there are many dozens of verses in the Gita in which Krishna describes that which is indescribable. And we were given some of our first clues in chapter 3. There is nothing in all three worlds, O Partha, for me to accomplish. Neither is there anything I have to gain, nor anything I cannot have. Yet I am constantly engaged in action. For if I did not continue to act unceasingly, men all round would follow my path. If I should cease to act, these worlds would perish. I would be the cause of confusion among creatures, and they would be destroyed. As the unenlightened work attached to action, so too the enlightened man works without attachment for the welfare of the world. And we immediately see here the commonality of character from this quote between the avatar and the bodhisattva. Both have nothing to gain by incarnation. They have completed the program of evolution, to say the least. They have learned all that can be assimilated through the long cycle of rebirths, and yet are ceaselessly engaged in action only for the welfare of sentient beings. And in Tibetan Buddhism, the celestial hierarchy, which incarnated as Gautama Buddha, is regarded as a kind of prototypical Dhyani Buddha, fully enlightened, as we said in a previous kalpa, who then sacrificially has taken birth many times in our world period in order to reenact the path to enlightenment and to show others the way. Sri Bhagavan said, "This imperishable yoga I imparted to Vivasvat. Vivasvat transmitted it to Manu, and Manu conveyed it to Ishvaku. Thus handed down in succession from teacher to pupil, the Rajarishis knew it. But owing to the long lapse of time, this yoga was lost to the world." In these verses alone, an epic story encompassing many mysteries central to Theosophia begin to come into view. As Judge says in his commentary, Vivasvat is a name or synonym for Surya, the sun god, who is depicted in the Rig Veda as riding a chariot with 7 horses. But Surya is not merely the visible solar orb, of course, but the hidden spiritual sun, the divine logos of 7 rays or lokas revered in the Gayatri Mantram. The 7 rays of Surya, explained HBB, refer to the 7 creative hosts, the principles of cosmic and human nature, the 7 globes of every planetary chain, while the 7 horses refer to the 7 great periods of each Manvantara. Surya, like Agni, is also a reference to the Agnishvata Pitris, the solar dhyanis of the human race, who lit up the 5th principle of manas, of mind, choice, and responsibility in the evolving human form. No doubt this was discussed last week in regards to Prometheus. But moreover, in this context, says Judge, Vivasvat refers to a being fully enlightened, again, in former periods of evolution, quote, appointed to guide the race at its beginning. And in the Mahabharata, Vivasvat is connected with the Matsya, or fish avatar of Vishnu, who rescues the 7 Manus and the Vedas, the sacred teaching, and carries them over the waters of the deluge. And like so many, many such so-called myths, H.P. Blavatsky explained that this has at least 7 levels of meaning. At a minimum, it refers both to the mysteries of cosmic unfoldment and to race evolution. Cosmically, the waters refer to the pre-cosmic ocean of space, also called the Great Deep or Aditi. But in terms of human evolution, the whole allegory refers to the transition between the 4th and 5th race linked to the biblical flood. Similarly, the term Manu is rich with levels of meaning. The Sanskrit is translated as man or human, and Manu Antara or Manvantara means between two Manus, referring to the seeds of archetypal humanity, as well as the patrons or guardians of these enormous periods of a cyclic evolution. The first Manu is called Svayambhu, meaning the self-existent, another term for the Logos, giving rise to the first human races, says HBB, of the first round with the help of the Dian Chohans. Though birthless and deathless, and though I am the Lord of all beings, yet I am born through my own Maya, becoming manifest through my material nature, Prakriti. Whenever there is a decline of righteousness, O descendant of Bharata, and an ascendance of immorality, then I manifest myself for the protection of the good, for the destruction of evildoers, for the firm establishment of righteousness. I come to birth from age to age. Notwithstanding what HPB calls the terrible confusion of Manus and Rishis and their progeny that are found in the Puranas, there are, she says, 14 Manus in each of the 7 rounds, a root and a seed Manu for each. And this makes credible the reference to Vivasvat as the 7th Manu, the celestial host or Dhyani associated with our present 4th round. The same holds true, she says, for the 7 root races, the period of a root race also being called a Manvantara. And she says there are also 7 Manu Rishis for each of the 7 subraces. And furthermore, as the incarnation of Krishna attests, there is also an avataric descent at the initiation and closure of each yuga. The same, no doubt, holds true for many lesser periods of 7 within the great Saros. Neither the host of gods nor the great seers know my origin, for I am verily the primordial source of all the gods and the great seers. The 7 great seers, Rishis, and the 4 ancient Manus are my mind-born emanations, and from them arose all these beings in the world. This last verse, HPB, and both HPB and Subbarao say, is a reference to the fact that Krishna, in one of his aspects, belongs to the 5th race, especially. The 4 Manus mentioned are linked to the 4 previous great races of this round. Thus, though Vishnu is often traditionally spoken of as having 10 incarnations, the actual number is far higher. The Bhagavata Purana mentions 22, but after enumerating them, adds, the incarnations of Vishnu are innumerable, like the rivulets flowing from an inexhaustible lake. The 10th avatar of Vishnu is said to be that of Kalki, associated by HPB with Maitreya Buddha, who, exoterically speaking, will not arrive until the end of the Kali Yuga in the 7th race. But Gautama Buddha, considered by Hindu teaching to be the 9th avatar, HPB also states was 27th in a lineage of Buddhas, 24 of which have incarnated in the 5th race alone. And she does equate these Buddhas with avatars. The 24 number are also found in the Jain tradition, the 24 Tirthankaras. And there we go. That's a sculpture of the representation. She also says that the 8th century Shankaracharya was an avatar of the spirit animating Gautama Buddha, and that the 14th century Tsongkhapa was an avatar of Amitabha. And in volume 2, page 423, she again equates masters with avatars. So besides the two who were her teachers, with whom she has said herself to have acted in strict obedience, there was her master's master, whom she called the Paraguru, also known as the Mahachohan, whose singular will, says Judge, upholds the entire movement. So we have then at least 5 mentioned specifically by HPB who have incarnated even since the time of the Buddha. But as the Gita teaches, the avatar principle is not limited to specific human incarnations or to that divine potentiality in every human heart, even. Every excellence, virtue, and luster of wisdom and drop of compassion in human nature, as well as their loss, arise from him. I am the taste in the water, O son of Kunti. I am the radiance of the moon and the sun, the sacred syllable Om in all the Vedas. I am sound in space and humanity in men. I am the sweet fragrance of the earth, the luminous glow of fire, the vitality in all beings, and I am the fervor of austerity and ascetics. In all beings, I am desire regulated by moral fitness. Intellection, wisdom, freedom from delusion, patience, truth, self-restraint, equanimity, weal and woe, birth and death, also fear and fearlessness, non-injury, sameness, contentment, austerity, charity, fame, and infamy. All these diverse modes of being arise from me alone. So as a way of trying to encompass and summarize, we have a kind of overarching thematic, which is found in the at the close of chapter 7, in which Krishna describes his nature, we could say as fourfold, related to Adhyatma, Adibhuta, Adidaivata, and Adiyajna. Those who strive towards deliverance from old age, take refuge in me. Those who strive in such a way can come to realize in full that Brahman, the Adhyatma, and the totality of karma. Those who know me as Adibhuta, as Adidaivata or Adidaiva, and also as the Adiyajna, the one that underlies all elements, all gods, and all sacrifices, they verily know me, even at the time of death, their consciousness being absorbed in me. Adhyatma we can correlate with Brahman, the absolute, no thing, or tat, that which cannot be named and is utterly beyond all Maya. Periodically, there arises within the boundless all, Adibhuta, the one element, which gives rise to all other elements, the divine substance, giving rise to all forms of matter, inseparable, says HPB, from universal pre-cosmic consciousness, the seed, again, of Saguna Vishnu, or what she calls the Adibuddhic monad. This periodical unity initiates the manifested logos, the demiurge called Ishvara by the Vedantins, which is also, in one context, considered the threefold Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. With the third logos, we have Adidaivata, or Adidaiva, the hierarchy of all the devas, as Mahat, the ocean of consciousness and intelligence, manifesting through the 7 sons of Brahma. And Adiyajna, the great sacrifice, we can link with the principle of Fohat found in the secret doctrine. In one aspect as Kamadeva, or divine eros, the desire which first arose in it, It is that divine compassion which periodically propels the formless to enter form, wherein the energy of divine ideation impresses itself upon matter as the laws of nature. It is that which bridges the above to the below, spirit to matter on every plane, in order to manifest an arena in which every point of life can eventually rise to the same self-conscious godhood that Krishna represents. All of this can be seen as aspects of universal cosmology correlated to the teaching given in The Secret Doctrine by HPB, by which the one seemingly becomes the many while ever remaining the one. And this brings us to our second question. How does realization of Krishna arise? Again, we will address it very briefly and inadequately, for it encompasses the entire path of enlightenment as a means of sacrificial service. Again, the Gita is rich with mantramic instruction, not unrelated to the passages and themes that we've already considered. For to know Krishna, we find we must not only become like unto the object of knowledge, but must enter into unity with it, with the highest conception of what is real, with the heart of every creature and the whole of nature, with the boundless all. The word yoga is often translated as union, and etymologically means to attach, yoke, or join. But in traditional Indian philosophy, it refers to a form of spiritual discipline. 17 types of yoga being mentioned in the title chapters of the Gita itself. And all of these can be categorized or reduced to the three primary disciplines: karma, bhakti, and jnana yoga. Though an individual may emphasize one or the other, in the end, we're told all three, along with abhyasa, that is constancy of practice in daily life, are necessary in preparation for what Bhavani Shankar spoke of as true discipleship and initiation. And in addition, all paths or margas must be tread with the complete renunciation of their fruits. The primary key, says Judge, is the purification of motive and the unselfish performance of duty. The sole aim and the only purpose in life for the initiate, says Bhavani Shankar, is the service and elevation of humanity. And this is also the basis for higher ethics, the beginning and middle and end of the spiritual path. Let not the fruit of thy work be thy motive, nor take refuge in the abstinence from works. Steadfast in mind in yoga, do thy works, casting off attachment. The same in success and failure. Equal-mindedness is called yoga. Verily, action is far inferior to the discipline of wisdom. In wisdom, seek thou shelter. He who is yoked to wisdom lets go both what is well done and what is ill done. Therefore, yearn for yoga. Yoga is skill in the performance of action. It is also in chapter 2 that we are given the timeless portrait of the self-governed sage, and where we find this purity of intent and steadfast wisdom just spoken of is not possible without the mind and heart steadily settled in the non-separate self of all beings, the all-pervading Brahman. All lower forms of ahankara, of sense of identity, are destructive to the end in view, and meditation and self-study are the keys for that steadfast awareness. When a man puts away all the desires that arise in the mind and reposes in the self, rejoicing in the self alone, he is spoken of as a man of steadfast wisdom. He whose mind is unperturbed by suffering, who is untouched by the allurement of happiness, from whom passion, fear, and anger have fallen away. He is called a Muni, a man established in meditation. The further we move in this direction, the more Kurukshetra, the wheel of samsara or field of battle, is transformed progressively into Dharmic Kshetra, the skillful means by which every karmic arena becomes an avenue of learning, self-correction, joyous rededication, and upliftment. And through this practice, the division between the secular and the sacred, between pravritti marga, that is the outward going path, and nivritti marga, the inward turning, begins to fall away. Even involvement in politics, as Gandhi demonstrated and exemplified, can be undertaken in a form of spiritual archery when combined with relentless self-purification as a means of service to the least and the lowest. As the Gita states, Krishna is also Arjuna. He is the innate hunger of the soul, which willingly and fearlessly undertakes the Mahabharatan battle, the inner alchemy necessary to overcome or transform all impediments and obstacles to that union. He's also the higher self, which provides the illumination needed. To those who are constantly yoked and worship me with love, I confer that intuitive understanding by which they approach me. So we find the path of jnana yoga, the yoga of wisdom or of devotion through spiritual knowledge, as found in the 4th chapter of the Gita and reiterated in the culminating chapter of the 18th, is not simply for the Hindu, the Sanskrit scholar, or the forest-dwelling ascetic. It is open to each and every human being, willing to meet the preconditions. And in the 4th chapter, those preconditions are translated by Judge as fourfold. Seek this wisdom by doing service, by strong search, by questions, and by humility. The wise who see the truth will communicate it unto thee, and knowing which thou shalt never again fall into error. By this knowledge, thou shalt see all things and creatures whatsoever in thyself, and then in me. The service and work, we're told, which the ends of humanity exemplify, and which they advise all, says Judge in his commentary, is that on behalf of humanity as a whole. Can one raise a question on behalf of the whole? Can we happily and lovingly admit we were wrong on behalf of the whole? Can we stifle and crush our own ego or vanity on behalf of the whole? Can we find true joy in sustaining a discipline with no payback for the personal ego on behalf of the whole? The promise that Krishna holds out is that he will aid all such authentic efforts in this direction. And that from small beginnings, a small candle can become a great continuous flame and beacon light for others. By steadily devoting ourselves to this path, says the Gita, we not only eventually reach a supreme tranquility and peace, we not only awaken the highest creative capacities inherent in the soul and in the logos of nature, but we also eventually rejoin in conscious awareness our union with that deathless brotherhood of bodhisattvas and mahatmas, the wisest guardians and guides of the human race. Fix thy mind on me, become my devotee, sacrifice unto me, prostrate before me. Thus, having me as your supreme goal and having yoked thyself, thou shalt surely come to me. So we have time for questions and comments and discussion. I know many of you are avid students of the Gita, so I'm sure we could have a lively discussion.
Got a hand up here. Thank you so much, Kirk. Go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I was just wondering, in the work that we get, the Secret Doctrine and its study, it points out that the true student of the SD is a jnana yogi, and that this is the path, the true path for the Western student. Why do you think jnana yogi would be the path of the Western student in your estimation of the SD?
Well, that's a very good question. There's probably many ways to answer that. We don't pretend to know definitively why HPV says that. But one of the things that we mentioned in the talk, and that you also find in the Gita itself, is that none of those three paths, jnana, bhakti, or karma, which is said by many to encompass every form of spiritual aspiration, they can all fall into one of those categories, but that in the end, all three have to merge, right? That one cannot reach the pinnacles of wisdom, of jnana yoga, without love and devotion, without compassion for all that lives, right? And also without developing the skill in the performance of action. Because as the Gita states, we are bound by our very nature to act. Even the ascetic who, withdraws to the forest is creating karma, and will be forced by his nature to act. And one way to answer that question is that it doesn't exclude the other two paths, right? But also perhaps, it could be that say for the vast numbers of relatively uneducated Easterners, millions upon millions of villagers who are rich in the devotional aspect of the spiritual path, may not have the opportunity for cultivating, say, the insight that comes with the jnana yoga path, bound to their duties just to maintain, a reasonable mode of living, having to farm for their food or beg for their food, constantly having to work just to keep, to care for their families and so on, that there's less of an opportunity, let's say, for the path of meditation and of jnana yoga, which also involves, one of the first stages of jnana yoga is the intellectual comprehension of the teaching, right? That's where it begins. That's because one cannot travel on the path unless one has studied that path. So that's just a few thoughts. Maybe others have ideas about why HPV made that statement.
Thank you very much, Kurt. That was a wonderful reply. Thank you.
Judy.
Other questions, comments?
Judy's got her hand up. Is that okay, Kurt?
Yes, please go ahead.
You got to unmute yourself, Judy.
How's that?
Good.
Yes, I
Hey,
can hear you now.
that was just a beautiful presentation. Kirk, thank you so much. I think in chapter 10, Krishna says, I am the ego seated in the heart of all beings. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all existing things. And this idea has always just blown my mind, because it seems not only are we all Arjunas involved in Kurukshetra and looking for Dharmashetra, but we're also all Krishnas. And it would seem strange, how can the little consciousness that most of us are be really Krishna? But it seems that because it's within us, we can develop that. And it seems that we develop that not only by the jnana yoga, the intellectual aspect, which is so prevalent in the West, because we have opportunity for education, but don't we need Raja yoga as well? We need some devotion, we need karma, and we need meditation to go with it. Because if we're just intellectual, we're not going to get anywhere. At least that's how I understand it. So could you explain that a little better, please? This is a wonderful presentation.
Oh, thanks, Judy. Well, my understanding is that Raja Yoga is the synthesis of the yogas. That's the true yoga. And that, again, it does involve all three of the margas, or the paths that we've just been discussing. And so, yes, that's an excellent point. We do tend to emphasize the intellect, and as Bhavani Shankar stated in one of the quotes that I gave, that it's sort of a characteristic of the age and of our time, the proud intellect. All the great pundits and Orientalists that may have a deep and a rich intellectual comprehension of Hindu philosophy or theosophy, but that in itself does not confer wisdom. And this is a point that Judge makes also in his commentary on the fourth chapter, and also Crosby. It's a point that's repeatedly gone into, and of course HPB herself, points out intellect is still an aspect of kama manas, that it is still bound by the desire nature, by the personality, by the quaternary. It's still trapped in lower forms of ahankara. And so even though it can be highly developed, in a very impressive way, in a very scientific way, that it can still be a block and a downward course, in fact, in regards to the true spiritual path, right? So that's why you have, like in the Buddhist tradition, the integration of ethics and of meditation, in which the ideas are dwelt upon in an effort to penetrate to the realities that are behind the words, right? Because this is also an aspect of dogmatism. We get stuck on a certain formulation and thinking that it's the truth. No, it's the finger pointing to the moon. It's not yet the moon. And so it's this process of dwelling upon and meditating upon the ideas that they begin to emerge as truths in nature. And then we start to see, we become more generously appreciative of the immense diversity of ways that they can be expressed. And at the same time, of course, it's the ethical dimension too, that they have to be put into practice. Without those two factors, this inner awakening and apprehension, and the application, that the fullness of what's heart doctrine in the voice of the silence will not emerge. So thank you, Judy, for that comment. Other questions or comments? Yes, Monica.
I have a question.
Oh, first Monica, then Michelle.
I wondered, first of all, thank you. This was just such a great presentation. Thank you very much. But I wondered, is Krishna our sixth principle complete? And what I mean by that, fully realized, independent, obviously, of human nature, though channeled, I guess that would be the word that comes up.
Is Krishna our sixth principle? Well, in one sense, yes. And in another sense, no, it is beyond that, even the sixth. And we started with that, those quotes from the SD in which HPB is talking about the parents of Krishna and the previous 7 children prior to Krishna who are all slain until Krishna is born, and how Krishna represents that the 8th, in fact, she says. It's referring to the circle in which all the other 7 arise, and also which have to be conquered and overcome and transcended in order to realize the unity of them all. That's the 8th. That's why Krishna is the 8th child. So, and that, of course, it's, so in that sense, it would seem, and just another point I didn't really mention, but we also get HPB characterizing this, which she calls the bija, the Adi Buddha, the seed of all avatars, as both nirguna and saguna Vishnu, aspects of Vishnu, nirguna and saguna. So you're probably familiar with this in Eastern philosophy. You find in the Upanishads and the commentaries of Shankaracharya that Brahman is one, utterly transcendent, beyond the coming and going of universes, and also pervading all universes that arise and withdraw within this boundless, unnameable absolute. That's Brahman, and that's also the highest human principle. But because it pervades, it is also that which sacrificially emanates, radiates, emanates, incarnates. So that's the Buddhic aspect, you could say, or Buddhi-manasic aspect even. Yeah. So I don't know, is that enough to answer your question?
Well, it is, and I think that I expressed my question not as fully as I should have, but what I meant was the universal Buddhi, the overarching Buddhi.
Right.
Is that who Krishna is, however he may manifest. So you answered it basically.
Yeah, both cosmic and human, yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And that's one of the, I won't go into a lot of detail about it, but Bhavani Shankar's commentaries on the doctrine of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a chapter called The Doctrine of Avatars, where he goes into very specific detail regarding that whole teaching, which is really a wonderful read if you get the time, get the chance. Michelle, you also had a comment or question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It was quite wonderful. I was wondering if you have studied the Uttara Gita, and if you could explain, is that a part of the Mahabharata, or where does that teaching come from?
That's a good question. I can't say I've really studied in detail the Uttara. I've read it, and it's very esoteric. I have a copy of it right here, in fact. And it was published as part of the CGP version of the Bhagavad Gita. And it is prefaced, the title, as I believe it's the initiation of Arjuna. And it's said to have taken place, as you probably know, after the close of the Mahabharata war. So whether it's actually a part of that, I'm not certain. But you probably also recall that Krishna, or rather Arjuna, is at least giving the impression that he doesn't recall exactly what Krishna told him, and that was taken down in the Gita. But in fact, the answers are they're an extension of and go deeper into you could say, many more esoteric aspects of what is given in the Gita. So it's very worthwhile for a student, if they, after having studied the Gita for some time, to look at that. But it requires, a detailed investigation.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Other comments or questions?
Just wanted.
Oh, I'm going to mute.
I just wanted. Is your audio?
Turn yours off. We got a question over here, but we have technical issues. Stand by.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to comment that
Can you speak louder?
one thing that I was taught about Raja Yoga was that it had to do with transformation, and in transformation you have the synthesis of the other three yogas. And so I don't know if that word would be helpful to anyone, but I find it helpful. And you see, like, Raj is also associated with kings and rulers, and they can be responding to different people in different ways, and it's kind of like shape shifting in a sense, and a bit transformative.
Very much so. That, I think you could say that's what's implied by the battle, the Mahabharatan battle, right? Because the opposing forces are all of those ideas, elementals, and principles that we've cultivated with a separate sense of self, and over many lives, right? This is the old human story that we're trying to undo, what we've been cultivating over ages, centuries, yugas, maybe. So as we begin to try and cultivate a true spiritual perspective and recenter our identity in the true self, all of those past elementals come to greet us. And the only way to deal with that is to begin a process of transformation. So it's referred to as slaying or paralyzing the lower ego. It's also a transmutation of that which has previously acted as a block to understanding and wisdom and truth, to that which participates willingly, lovingly participates in those truths and realities. So yeah, it's a path of alchemy. That's why it's spoken of as a path of alchemy. It's where base metal is transformed into pure gold.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Well, I think our time is about up, isn't it, Jonathan?
We have 5 more minutes, but wait,
Okay.
maybe I'm not confused. Yeah, it'd be 5 more minutes. So this is your chance. Going on. So if anybody has any questions,
Monica.
Yeah, Monica.
Monica, please.
Sorry. Okay. forgive a dumb skull question. How do we differentiate or discern all the Krishnas? How do we think of it in our minds?
Yeah,
Or the different avatars.
right.
When we listen and when we study the Gita and we listen to Lord Krishna from the Gita, how do we listen? Do we listen to him as our higher self? Do we listen to him as an incarnation? Do we listen to him as what I'm still calling the overarching or the universal or the cosmic Krishna? How do we best do this so that we're able to say, perhaps become more impersonal, while at the same time feel like we are in teacher-student dialogue?
Well, I think I counted 6 or 7 questions there, Monica. And those are not numbskull questions at all. So, but I really liked the first one that I heard, which was, how do we distinguish the different Krishnas? And because this is something I was thinking about a lot in preparation for this. But because it's such a magnificent conception and mystery, how one principle, one celestial principle that is continuous throughout a given manvantara, unchanging. And HPB speaks of it as, it's like ocean of fire, from which shoot out like 7 flames, the dhyanis. And that those dhyanis then project images, more concrete images of themselves, right? Which are the celestial Buddhas, and then the celestial bodhisattvas, and then the super terrestrial bodhisattvas. And so you have this descending hierarchy of beings who then also have to take on a personality in a given cycle and bring a teaching, bring a presence, manifest that personality in such a way that the utmost good that can be done under karma for the aiding the human evolution can take place. So it has to be appropriate to the time, to the age, to the race, to the century, to the language, to the what all the karmic factors that are taking place currently in that epoch. And so there's a very detailed, you could say, sort of dialing in from this, one universal source to the being that's actually incarnated. That is, again, going to do the utmost that is possible in that particular age. So that I think is it's helpful to think about that, because as she says, the being we think of as Gautama Buddha was incarnated at least 24 times in the 5th race prior to his incarnation as Gautama, right? And then also incarnated as Shankaracharya. So it's these prototypical celestial realities, which again, it's just to wrap our minds around that is a big deal. But then the sacrificial descent. But one of the things that I'll just mention in closing is that what's particular to our age, you could say, is the theosophical teaching, where instead of lost ancient languages of Sanskrit or ancient Greek or so on, or hieroglyphics from ancient Egypt, where you have sort of multiple lenses through which it reaches us. So by the time we read it in English, we may not really be getting the gist of what was meant, right? But now we have a teaching that was given in the English language, apparently through these same beings that gave us the Gita, and it's magnificent. It's part, again, it's part of the Aquarian age. It's part of that, the descent and the what's called the sixth and seventh impulsion of the Theosophical movement, beginning with Tsongkhapa, who, as we were told, is the incarnation of Amitabha. So there was Avatar. It began with an avataric descent. And now, this is this tremendous opportunity we have as students to be studying this literature in our own language. And, which, as we know, is lifetime worth of study. So there's a few thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirk. I think now the time's up. So now, okay. Well, yeah, and this whole thing reminds me of, especially that question about transformation. Remember that really short article by Judge called the Bhagavad Gita and the Zodiac, Two Lost Keys. And my joke about that is that should be like 14 books or something, but it's 2 pages and it's very cryptic and just abbreviated. But basically, they both have to do with transformation, don't they? And the Zodiac, really, if you look at the different signs, as we learned from Michelle a few weeks back, it's all about transformation, and it's all about the paramitas, and it's all about the path of transformation and enlightenment and so forth. And just like the Bhagavad Gita is, really. So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I just wanted to mention one more thing about these Aquarian series. Is that I was talking about this with actually Carolyn one time, and she was saying that people want to learn something. People want to experience something new. And that's what you've done, Kirk, is that you've done your homework and you've done your research, and we've got to learn about something from a whole different perspective. And there's not only breadth, but there's depths and points to draw us towards the diamond soul. And it even reminds me of something I was talking about with Helena Karakazi about if there's not neurogenesis in these presentations, then we're not doing it. In other words, if there's not the birth of new brain cells or the birth of new neural pathways or whatever, which is what learning seems to be involved with. So thank you very much for being so deep and so broad in perspective on this. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Kurt. Did you have something?
No, just to thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.
And for listening to everyone. Thanks for your participation.
And all your questions. Take care, you guys.